Tula Bankhead. Tula Bankhead was as bold with her beliefs as she was with her performances. Known for her smoky voice, biting wit, and untamed lifestyle, Bankhead was one of Hollywood's most scandalous and unforgettable personalities. But behind the glamour and defiance was a worldview that shocked even her contemporaries. A self-declared atheist, Bankhead scoffed at religious tradition and made no apologies for her stance. In an era when Hollywood stars often masked their true beliefs to please the public, she openly mocked the idea of divine judgment and refused to conform to religious norms. Her views on God, or lack thereof, were deeply rooted in her rebellious nature. She believed in living life on her own terms, free from what she saw as the guilt and restrictions of organized religion. Church leaders condemned her, but Tula didn't flinch. In fact, she often used their criticism as fuel for her unapologetic lifestyle. For Bankhead, morality wasn't dictated by the heavens, it came from within. And in a world that demanded reverence, she chose irreverence. Her disbelief wasn't quiet, it was loud, proud, and utterly fearless. Edward G. Robinson. Edward G. Robinson, forever etched in cinema history as the tough-talking gangster with the piercing stare, held beliefs that were as sharply defined as his on-screen persona. Despite being born into a Romanian Jewish family and exposed to religious traditions from a young age, Robinson later identified as an atheist. He was a deeply intellectual man who found more comfort in philosophy, art, and humanitarian values than in religious doctrine. While he respected cultural traditions, Robinson questioned the existence of a divine being, viewing religion more as a social construct than spiritual truth. He championed rational thought and was a firm believer in human responsibility over divine intervention. In private circles, he was vocal about his skepticism, though he navigated Hollywood's religious sensitivities with measured tact. Robinson poured his faith not into prayer, but into causes he believed in: civil rights, freedom of expression, and democracy. He saw morality as a product of conscience, not commandments. For Robinson, living a meaningful life didn't require belief in a God, it required belief in humanity. In an era of forced reverence, he quietly chose reason over religion. John Huston. John Huston, the legendary director behind cinematic classics like The Maltese Falcon and The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, had a sharp eye for storytelling, and an even sharper skepticism when it came to religion. Huston was openly atheistic, never shying away from expressing his disbelief in a higher power. To him, organized religion was more of a man-made illusion than a divine truth. His worldview was forged through a life of intellectual curiosity, artistic exploration, and witnessing the hypocrisy he often associated with religious institutions. Huston's films reflected a deep existentialism, characters haunted by greed, guilt, or futility, rarely saved by divine grace. His work was a mirror to his beliefs, gritty, honest, and void of spiritual fantasy. Huston often spoke of religion as a barrier to human freedom and authenticity. He believed morality should be rooted in experience and personal responsibility, not fear of eternal punishment. In a time when Hollywood carefully crafted public images, Huston remained defiant, unfiltered, and faithless. His rejection of God wasn't dramatic, it was deliberate, thoughtful, and part of what made his creative mind so uncompromisingly bold. James Whale. James Whale, the visionary director behind horror masterpieces like Frankenstein and The Invisible Man, approached life and death with an unflinching realism that mirrored his rejection of religious belief. Openly gay in an era when silence was expected, Whale was equally unafraid to speak about his atheism. Raised in working-class England under the heavy hand of religion, he quickly grew disillusioned with doctrines that, to him, offered no answers, only judgment and shame. Instead of clinging to faith, Whale found meaning in creativity, art, and personal freedom. His films often explored themes of isolation, creation, and identity, deep questions traditionally answered by religion, yet in Whale's world, resolved through science and human experience. He viewed religion as a societal tool, not a divine truth. In his final years, suffering from illness and depression, Whale maintained his secular worldview, ultimately choosing to end his life on his own terms. For Whale, the absence of belief didn't equate to despair, it meant control, honesty, and clarity. In a town driven by illusion and reverence, James Whale boldly embraced the truth as he saw it: no gods, just stories, and he told them brilliantly. Orson Welles. Orson Welles, the genius behind Citizen Kane, lived in a world of shadows, light, and layered truths, but not divine ones. Though raised with exposure to religious ideas, Welles later described himself as an agnostic, leaning strongly toward atheism. He saw religion not as sacred, but as theatrical, a grand performance that shaped human behavior, often through fear and control. Wells, a master of illusion and introspection, had little patience for what he considered unprovable beliefs. He often spoke about the moral independence of man, asserting that ethical behavior should come from conscience, not commandments. Religion, he argued, stifled curiosity and encouraged conformity, two things he detested. His films were rarely about redemption through God. Instead, they explored the human condition, power, corruption, and personal downfall, grounded entirely in the real world. Wells believed that storytelling, not scripture, was how we made sense of life. To him, art was more powerful than any divine message. While Hollywood feared controversy, Wells embraced it. His rejection of religious belief wasn't about provocation, it was about authenticity. He trusted reason, not revelation, and that made his work, and his life, profoundly human. Douglas Sirk. Douglas Sirk, the master of melodrama whose lush 1950s films like All That Heaven Allows and Imitation of Life exposed the quiet despair beneath suburban perfection, held a worldview that rejected religious belief in favor of human complexity. Born in Germany and shaped by the horrors of World War II and the rise of fascism, Cirk developed a deep skepticism toward institutions, including organized religion. Though his films often featured themes of redemption and morality, they rarely leaned on divine intervention. Instead, Cirk portrayed a world where people struggled with social constructs, internal guilt, and emotional repression, all human-made prisons. Off-screen, he was open about his agnostic or atheistic views, seeing religion as a system that too often masked suffering and justified hypocrisy. He believed truth came from emotional honesty and critical thinking, not faith. For Cirk, the real drama wasn't in spiritual warfare, it was in the quiet pain of ordinary lives. His rejection of God wasn't dramatic or rebellious, it was intellectual, grounded in his understanding of history and humanity. In the glossy surface of 1950s cinema, Cirk dared to reflect reality, without divine illusions. Rex Harrison. Rex Harrison, best known for his charming, intellectual roles in films like My Fair Lady and Dr. Dolittle, carried his real-life sophistication into his personal beliefs, beliefs that firmly excluded religion. Though born and raised in a Christian culture, Harrison later distanced himself from any faith, describing himself as an atheist. He found religious doctrine overly rigid and unconvincing, preferring a worldview grounded in logic, reason, and personal responsibility. Known for his razor-sharp wit and occasionally sharp tongue, Harrison didn't shy away from critiquing organized religion, which he often saw as a form of social control rather than spiritual truth. His performances often portrayed characters who transformed through education and intellect, never divine awakening. In his personal life, Harrison embraced a kind of secular humanism, valuing culture, conversation, and critical thought over prayer or ritual. While Hollywood often preferred its stars to appear reverent, Harrison made no effort to hide his disbelief. For him, the stage and screen were realms of imagination, but real life required realism. And in his view, that realism left no room for gods, only for human will and wit. Joseph Cotten. Joseph Cotten, the distinguished actor remembered for his roles in classics like Citizen Kane and The Third Man, was as thoughtful off-screen as he was charismatic on it. While many of his contemporaries held on to traditional beliefs, Cotten quietly rejected religion and embraced atheism. He was a man of reason, favoring a worldview grounded in human experience rather than divine intervention. Cotten believed morality and meaning arose from personal conscience and social responsibility, not from religious doctrine. His intellectual approach to life was reflected in the complex, often conflicted characters he portrayed, men who faced ethical dilemmas without relying on spiritual comfort. Cotten's atheism was not confrontational but a private conviction, shaped by his skepticism toward the promises of religion and its failure to address human suffering adequately. In an era when Hollywood stars often hid controversial beliefs, Cotten chose discretion but remained true to his convictions. For him, the search for truth was a human endeavor, with no need for gods or miracles. His legacy is a testament to living with integrity in a godless world. Jean Renoir. Jean Renoir, one of cinema's greatest directors and the son of the famous painter Pierre-Auguste Renoir, was known not only for his artistic brilliance but also for his skepticism toward religion. Raised in a culturally rich but secular environment, Renoir rejected traditional beliefs and identified as an atheist. For him, the divine held no place in the unfolding human drama he captured so vividly on screen. His films, such as La Grande Illusion and The Rules of the Game, explored human nature, social class, and moral ambiguity without appealing to religious salvation. Renoir believed that human beings were responsible for their own fate, not pawns of a higher power. He criticized religion as a source of division and hypocrisy, preferring instead to focus on human kindness and understanding as the true forces of change. His atheism was thoughtful, rooted in a profound belief in the dignity and complexity of people. In a world longing for easy answers, Renoir embraced uncertainty, trusting art and humanity over faith and dogma.